The hardest part isn't being alone. It's looking around and feeling like everyone else kept moving while your life somehow stayed in the same place. You don't notice it overnight. It begins with small moments. A friend announces he's moving in with someone. Another gets engaged. Someone you used to message casually posts photos from a vacation with the same man he's been with for 3 years. You smile. You leave a heart reaction. You tell yourself you're genuinely happy for them. And maybe you are. But after you put your phone down, the room feels quieter than it did a minute ago, because their happiness accidentally reminds you of your own unanswered questions. Not because you envy them, because you wonder where your story went. There is a particular kind of loneliness that isn't created by being physically alone. It's created by feeling out of sync with the people around you. It feels as though everyone received the same map, except you. Nobody talks much about this feeling, especially in communities where confidence is often expected to look effortless, where everyone seems attractive, connected, social, always attending another event, another trip, another celebration. From the outside, it can look like everyone is finding where they belong. Meanwhile, you're still trying to figure out whether you belong anywhere at all. Social media quietly amplifies that feeling. Not because people are lying. Because you're only seeing completed moments. You don't see the arguments before the smiling photo. You don't see the anxiety before the engagement. You don't see the loneliness that exists inside relationships. You compare your everyday life to everyone else's highlight reel. And comparison has a strange effect. It rarely motivates, quietly convinces you that you're running out of time. Suddenly birthdays don't just represent age. They become invisible deadlines. Every year starts feeling less like another chapter and more like another missed opportunity. You begin asking questions that never used to exist. Why am I still here? What am I doing wrong? Why does connection seem to happen so naturally for everyone else? Those questions don't usually arrive with dramatic heartbreak. They arrive during ordinary evenings, after another conversation that slowly faded, after another first date that never became a second, after another promise that dissolved into silence without explanation. Eventually something changes. You stop assuming new people will stay. You start assuming they'll leave. Not because you've become cynical, because repetition teaches expectations. When enough endings begin to resemble each other, your mind starts preparing for the next one before it even happens. That's how emotional protection quietly develops. You reply a little less enthusiastically. You hesitate before sharing something personal. You laugh instead of admitting you're disappointed. Not because you don't want intimacy, because losing it before you fully trusted it somehow hurts less. At least that's what your mind begins believing. Modern dating doesn't always create this feeling, but it can intensify it. Dating apps give you access to thousands of faces, thousands of possibilities. And yet, choice doesn't always create connection. Sometimes it creates comparison. Every swipe becomes another reminder that someone younger exists, someone more confident, someone who appears more adventurous, someone who seems easier to love. Without realizing it, you stop meeting people. You start evaluating yourself. Every profile becomes a mirror. Every rejection becomes a verdict. Every unanswered message starts sounding louder than the conversations that actually went well. Over time, you become skilled at editing yourself. You rewrite messages 3 times before sending them. You wonder if you sounded too interested, or not interested enough, too emotional, too distant, too available, too difficult. Instead of asking whether someone is right for you, you quietly begin asking whether you're acceptable to them. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because once your attention moves from curiosity to self-monitoring, connection becomes exhausting. You're no longer simply getting to know another person. You're trying to manage their perception of you every second. That constant awareness drains people. Quietly, it creates a version of loneliness that exists even during conversation. You can spend an entire evening laughing with someone while secretly wondering whether you're already saying something that will make them lose interest. That's not connection. That's surveillance, directed inward. Eventually, the emotional weight becomes difficult to recognize because it feels normal. You stop calling it loneliness. You call it independence. You stop calling it disappointment. You call it being realistic. You stop admitting that you hoped this person might stay. You tell yourself you never expected anything anyway. Sometimes those stories protect us. Sometimes they simply hide the grief long enough for it to settle deeper. Feeling left behind doesn't always mean wanting exactly what someone else has. Often, it's grieving the future you imagined for yourself. Maybe you pictured introducing someone to your family, building routines together, growing older beside someone who knew your ordinary days as well as your best ones. When those milestones don't happen according to the timeline you imagined, it can feel as though you've somehow failed an invisible test. Even when no one is judging you, you begin judging yourself. That's the quiet danger of comparison. It transforms possibility into pressure. Life becomes something to measure instead of something to experience. Then another belief quietly appears. If it hasn't happened yet, maybe it never will. That thought feels convincing because it sounds logical. But feelings are not reliable calendars. Being afraid that you're behind doesn't mean your future has already been decided. It means uncertainty has become louder than hope. There is another truth hidden underneath all of this. Many people aren't actually grieving singleness. They're grieving the feeling of being unseen. They don't simply want a relationship. They want somewhere their guard can finally come down. Somewhere they no longer have to explain themselves, perform themselves, or constantly wonder whether they're enough. Because the deepest human longing is rarely perfection. It's rest. The kind of emotional rest that comes from believing you don't have to earn your place every single day. If you've spent years feeling left behind, that kind of rest can begin to feel impossible. Not because it doesn't exist. Because you've forgotten what it feels like to expect it. And expectations shape perception. When you've been disappointed enough times, your mind starts scanning for proof that disappointment is about to happen again. A delayed reply feels larger than it really is. A canceled plan feels more personal. A small misunderstanding feels like the beginning of another ending. Not because you're weak, because repeated disappointment can make uncertainty feel louder than reassurance. The difficult part is that this cycle often feeds itself. The more convinced you become that you'll be left behind, the more difficult it becomes to believe someone who genuinely wants to know you. Not because you don't want love, because you've become unfamiliar with safety. Yet being left behind is not an identity. It's a feeling. Feelings can linger. They can shape the stories we tell ourselves. But they don't get to write the ending. The people you compare yourself to are living lives as complex as your own, even if you only witness their brightest moments. Your timeline doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Your worth isn't measured by anniversaries, engagements, or perfectly curated photographs. The quiet truth is this. Feeling left behind often says more about the stories you've carried than the future that's waiting for you. Sometimes healing doesn't begin when someone finally chooses you. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop using someone else's life as evidence against your own. Because the life you're grieving may never have been lost, only delayed. And delayed is not the same thing as over.